All right. It's 11:01, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Julie Edmonds. I'm director of the Early College Research Center, housed at SERV at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and we are one of the co-hosts of this conference and are delighted to have you all joining us. So for those of you who are not researchers, the structure of the session might be a little bit different than what you're used to. We have two different researchers who are going to share two different papers and presentations about their work. These two did not plan or coordinate the sessions in advance. However, they are on very similar topics, so we've grouped them together. Each presenter is going to have between 15 to 17 minutes to talk. If you have any clarifying questions, please put those in the chat and we'll ask those in as close to real time as possible. If you have kind of more substantive questions or want to talk about kind of the bigger ideas of the conference, then we're going to hold those for discussion at the end to make sure that our presenters have time to share everything. Okay, so our first presenter will be Holly Nichols from the Belk Center at NC State, and then she'll be followed by Sarah Griffin from the Community College Research Center at Teachers College. Holly, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Julie. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Yes, I'm so happy to be here. I'm really thrilled to be able to be a part of this conversation. Again, my name is Holly Nichols. I work at the Belk Center for Community College Leadership and Research. We are a center that's located in North Carolina at NC State University. And what we focus on is providing professional development, research insights, other kinds of supports for leaders of community colleges. The goal of my session today is to just share a little of the initial findings that we found, building on, the plethora of insights that many have already offered, including CCRC, where my co-presenter is located, and really just kind of delving in to the findings that are about overall dual enrollment outcomes and enrollment, and really figuring out how those dual enrollment students are engaging in particular courses in particular places. So we're just kind of specifying a little bit more what is happening so that we can better understand best practices. We'd also just like to shine a spotlight on some unique opportunities that may exist specifically in STEM pathways in rural regions. And I'm hoping to be able to learn from you and my co-panelists as our team is developing our next phases of insights in this work. The nexus of this research thread will not be a shock to anybody here in this room, right? That persistent teacher shortages are a big part of our education landscape throughout K-12, throughout post-secondary as well, which I'll touch on in a little bit. I just wanted to bring us back to this statistic with that was produced by Nguyen, Brown, and Bruno in 2022. They actually pulled teacher vacancy listings from Department of Education websites, news reports, anything from the state level starting in 2021. And the findings for teacher shortages overall were abysmal, right? And nationally, there are over 55,000 K-12 vacancies. Making that a little bit closer to home, I'm here in North Carolina, and just wanted to share a little bit about what that looks like in our context. Between 2021 and 2023, the state's public high schools saw a 23% increase in high school teacher vacancies. And if we break that down, those high school vacancies, teacher vacancies, further by subject groups, we can see that there's much more turnover in vacancies specifically for high school math teachers in comparison to other classes like English and science high school teachers. We were thinking about that.
It's just oblivious to what that
sorry, I wasn't sure if that was a question. So in the broad landscape of college level courses, we, in addition to community college dual enrollment classes, there's also AP and IB. But when we're talking about particularly difficult areas to staff and to have instructors, even if AP is expanding throughout states and in schools, or IP, even if those are gaining momentum, finding qualified teachers, especially in rural locations, still really presents challenges to be able to consistently administer those classes. Now, community college instructors are often facing very similar strains on filling instructor positions, but the shortage is less severe. There are some other added elements to community college math instruction, including the fact that some people can do that part-time, including the fact that the pay wage is a little bit higher. So in places where there is an unbalanced representation of qualified math instructors, we definitely see community college instructors as being an opportunity to expand access to key math courses. Here's just a little bit more. Nationally, community colleges have seen about a 9% drop in filled instructor positions. So that's a little different than vacancies, because higher education kind of counts it in a different way. And then in statewide, it's a similar picture along all community college instructors, with about half of these instructors as part-time faculty and about half as full-time faculty. And among community college instructors, curriculum faculty retention is about the same, and whether you're in a rural area or an urban area. So we found that from North Carolina's administrative data that that retention is actually pretty close to about 80%, regardless of the rurality of the location. Here I'm leaning on CCRC and their fantastic reporting on transfer, and especially looking at transfer credits by age. We can really identify students who are community college students and under the age of 18, which is kind of how we're identifying dual enrollment students. And in terms of dual enrollment, North Carolina has just a little more than the national average of dual enrollment. So we're at about 1 in 4 community college students are dually enrolled, whereas the national average is 1 in 5. And in both the national trends as well as North Carolina, we're seeing like an uptrend. It's not as stark with in North Carolina as it is nationally, but it's still definitely an uptrend between 2019 and 2022. One thing that we did notice as we were looking at this, again, this is very broad and we wanted to go a little bit more detailed, is when we looked at course enrollments by subject, we really saw this incredible uptick that was much sharper than overall engagement in dual enrollment. We saw a 45% increase between fall of 2017 and fall of 2022 in math specifically. So we thought that that was really interesting, especially with the context that in North Carolina, about 3/4 of all dual enrollment students in any subject are taking at least one online dual enrollment class. Now, I'm not able to see if these math courses are online or in person, but those two elements together were intriguing, and so we wanted to dig in a little more. To do that, we knew that we needed to focus on the most important classes. So for this study, we looked at highly transferable math courses. So these classes count as general ed requirements. Statistics is a math prerequisite for many non-STEM majors like business. Calculus and pre-calculus are prereqs for a lot of STEM majors. And they were the most utilized in the state. The sequential nature of math, as opposed to say history or English or things that you might be able to take in a different order, was also important to us. So we wanted to focus on that. Oh, this is tiny, really sorry. You don't have to look at it too much. Just wanted to give you the sense of enrollment trends over time in these math DE courses in rural serving community colleges. So they stay relatively static with a little bit of an upturn after the pandemic. So exploring overall patterns and uptake in math, dual enrollment, I was really curious about how those classes look through the lens of rural student populations. What you're looking at here is Tier 1 counties. This is something that the Department of Commerce and the state codifies different counties based on their economic well-being. And this map indicates the most recent Tier 1 counties. Tier 1 is the most economically distressed, and they're also all rural counties. So the question we really wanted to answer was whether dual enrollment, specifically in these keystone math courses, served a larger share of North Carolina students in rural areas than in urban areas. Or in other words, to what extent are rural areas leveraging their secondary and post-secondary partnerships in subjects with significant shortages? To do this, we used administrative data on community college dual enrollment course enrollments by year, term, college, and course number. And then we aggregated the total headcount in these particular math classes by college and identified the colleges that serve these rural counties. Some of these community colleges serve more than one county, so we accounted for that, and others might serve just the one county. So that's kind of our numerator. And then for our denominator, because we know that high school student populations vary significantly in these different areas, we then pulled headcount data from the Department of Public Instruction, so the K-12 department in our state, to get a snapshot of how many 11th and 12th graders were attending public high schools. So our idea is like, of this many 11th and 12th graders in these rural counties, what's the proportion that of math dual enrollment, even if it's not a complete straight line to those individual students. What we found overall was that math dual enrollment numbers at the community colleges was about 25% across the board of the number of 11th and 12th graders in that district's public school. However, some dual enrollment math programs seem to be serving a larger proportion of their high school students, up to about 50% in some counties. So this is just a quick point of reference. This is the state's most urban counties. And so when we did it for the urban counties, we saw that it was pretty consistently 16 to 23% of 11th and 12th graders in the local public high school took math DE courses. And again, this does not account for availability of AP, availability of IB. This is just community college dual enrollment. So that's just to kind of give you a glimpse of areas that we really want to pay attention to. So these, the colleges that are serving these red counties, they're a much higher proportion. So we're curious in our second phase, what could be the factors that might be influencing that? In stage 2 of this work, we hope to connect dual enrollment course taking patterns with other factors that can be correlated and maybe even predictive of higher enrollment and then later success rates. We're thinking about whether the classes are online. We're thinking about their students' access to those. We're thinking a lot about proximity. Does the college have multiple campuses where the high school students could take these dual enrollment classes? Is the dual enrollment offerings actually in the high school as opposed to on the community college campus? What are the online or course options available? And then we're thinking about institutional factors like, the proportion of the college's enrollment that is dual enrollment. The ones that have higher dual enrollment levels might be better equipped to serve students in math. Whether or not dual enrollment is woven into the college's strategic plan, that's an area that the Belk Center works a lot in. And then efforts like partnerships between community college leaders and K-12 district leaders, marketing, recruitment, and then some broader statewide policy factors that we are going to be delving into. Some of this data has already been collected. But we wanted to point out that we think that in rural areas, the importance of these math dual enrollment classes cannot be underestimated. That for a lot of these high schools, that is the chance to take upper level math courses. I believe I am close to time. So I just wanted to share, again, my name is Holly Nichols. I want to recognize Kelsey Jenkins, who is a master's student who helped to put these things together. And the QR code here is just access to additional resources on transfer and dual enrollment through the Belk Center that we'd be happy to share with you.
Thank you very much, Holly. Appreciate it. There's a quick question about union pushback on these initiatives. I'm just going to answer that briefly.
Please,
North
yes.
Carolina does not have collective bargaining. It's considered a right to work state. So we do not face those particular challenges. So that's a thing that's unique to us, and I think 4 other, mostly southern states. Sarah, all yours.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Holly. That was a great presentation. Okay, so good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for joining this session. My name is Sarah Griffin, and I'm a researcher at the Community College Research Center, which is based at Teachers College, Columbia University. And today I'm going to talk about an emerging research-based dual enrollment framework, which is developed by researchers at the Community College Research Center. So I've been involved with this, but it's really very much been a collaborative effort amongst a large team of researchers at CCRC. And this framework helps demonstrate how community colleges and their K-12 partners can rethink and redesign how they implement dual enrollment to be an on-ramp to college and career opportunity, in particular for students who have been historically underrepresented in dual enrollment. And the name of this framework is called the Dual Enrollment Equity Pathways, or the DEEP framework. So I will just add that my presentation is less about course-taking patterns and more about kind of rethinking a general approach to general dual enrollment programs and how students can be onboarded to programs of study that will lead to high opportunity post-secondary trajectories and also high opportunity workforce programs. So what is the DEEP framework and how did it come about? A couple of things that we need to know in terms of context is that dual enrollment has grown tremendously over the past 2 decades, and most of that growth has taken place at community colleges. And this slide shows fall enrollment data among students 17 or younger across the country. And what we see here is that most of this expansion, again, has been at community colleges as opposed to other sectors. And even though this data is only going through 2021, we know from more recent data from the National Student Clearinghouse that even since 2021, we've seen double-digit growth of dual enrollment. In general, the expansion of dual enrollment has been really positive for students and communities. And as dual enrollment has expanded, there's a lot of different researchers that have been documenting the benefits and outcomes of dual enrollment. For example, about 10 years ago, CCRC wrote a brief summarizing what we already know about the benefits of dual enrollment. And then since then, there's been so much more research documenting the benefits, including What Works Clearinghouse intervention reports and other reports that show that, particularly for students who are in early college high school programs, which is a more intensive form of dual enrollment, students that participate can achieve really strong benefits. But even when we're looking at dual enrollment, course taking more generally and outside of early college programs, we see that students have really strong post-secondary outcomes. So far I've established that dual enrollment is widespread and also a strategy that has a lot of potential to help students gain post-secondary momentum. But the scholarly, practitioner, and policy communities have called for more research-based frameworks and evidence to understand how to make dual enrollment both more equitable and more intentional. And that's for 2 reasons. And the first is that we see from data on participation in dual enrollment, including our own national analysis of participation in dual enrollment across school districts, that dual enrollment programs tend to be referred to as programs of privilege. And this is because white students are vastly overrepresented in dual enrollment programs nationwide compared to almost all other demographic groups, but especially compared to Black students, Hispanic students, English language learners, and students with disabilities. And researchers who study dual enrollment contribute these gaps to exclusionary policies and practices in the dual enrollment sphere. And so this is one reason why we need more research. And the second is that dual enrollment programs tend to take a laissez-faire approach, which means that students are taking courses more at random rather than aligned to a specific program. And then at the same time, they're probably receiving limited or even no guidance to really support that exploration of their post-secondary options and make a plan for college and careers. So these are the two really big issues that this research set out to address. But now, when we look at school districts nationally, although there are these gaps in access, like I just described, there are about 1 in 5 school districts that have closed gaps in access to dual enrollment. So after making this observation, CCRC, in partnership with the Aspen Institute, studied a subset of these partnerships that had stronger outcomes in dual enrollment in terms of access and success for students of color. And this study is called the Dual Enrollment Playbook. And through that study, we documented a series of strategies that these partnerships use to broaden access. And these included things like connecting students to college advising and then providing high quality instruction to dual enrollment students. And so from the dual enrollment playbook research, we observed that many of the colleges that we visited were implementing guided pathways reforms. Some of you may be familiar with guided pathways or not, but it is a whole college redesign model developed by researchers at CCRC. And this is where community colleges are restructuring their program offerings, their services, and their supports across their institutions to help more students graduate in a timely and affordable manner. And this is a national movement that's taking place at hundreds of community colleges across the country. And so after observing this connection to guided pathways, to us, this kind of addressed this laissez-faire aspect to dual enrollment and led us to think more about what dual enrollment programs were offering in terms of coursework, but also other supports. So the deep research was motivated by our interest in understanding who was getting access to dual enrollment, but also what were students getting access to in terms of their dual enrollment programs and how they were being implemented. So drawing from these observations, the DEEP framework was inspired by the 3 questions that are on this slide. So first, stemming from the dual enrollment playbook research, we wanted to know what it looks like when guided pathways practices are implemented in dual enrollment programs. Secondly, we wanted to understand what we could learn from early college high school programs, which are smaller in scale in terms of dual enrollment programs nationally, but research shows that they have particularly compelling benefits for underrepresented students in particular. And then finally, we wanted to build on what we already knew around effective and equitable dual enrollment practices, such as those that were documented in the dual enrollment playbook research. So we did a review of the literature on these questions, and this led to the development of the DEEP framework, which is depicted on this slide in this diagram. And the diagram depicts the core components and also the goals of the framework. And as you can see, the DEEP framework is organized by 4 areas of practice. And these include conducting outreach to underserved students and schools to encourage them to participate in dual enrollment, aligning dual enrollment course offerings to college programs and workforce programs in high opportunity fields, providing dual enrollment students with early career and academic exploration, advising and planning, and then finally, delivering high quality instruction and academic support for dual enrollment students to build their confidence as college learners. And there's just a couple more things I will talk about with the framework itself. And one is that a key element is that dual enrollment should be designed to help students to get on a path to either a bachelor's degree program or a high-wage career. And this is different from, again, that laissez-faire approach to dual enrollment, which I mentioned earlier. And so the blue arrows here are depicting students' path from the dual enrollment program that they're in to either a bachelor's degree program or a workforce program. And then finally, I want to mention that this framework applies to standalone or a la carte dual enrollment courses, since this is the most common type of dual enrollment that's implemented nationally. And because dual enrollment programs can take various approaches, like being taught at the college, on the high school campus, or online, this DEEP framework is intended to apply to any of these types of approaches of dual enrollment. So to learn more about what the framework looked like in practice, we conducted an implementation study of high-performing dual enrollment partnerships. And so for the next part of this presentation, I'm going to very briefly describe the study that we did, and then I'll share what we learned. So for our field work, we collaborated with the states of Florida and Texas. These states are invested in guided pathways reform. So that's kind of the broader context and why we partnered with these states for this research. And in these states, we visited 6 community colleges and 12 of their high school partners for dual enrollment. And we conducted a lot of interviews. We spoke with college stakeholders. We spoke with folks at the K-12 level, as well as a lot of dual enrollment students. And we spoke with 289 people across all of these sites. As I mentioned, these partnerships we visited were high performing. And for this study, this meant that all of the community colleges were further along in their implementation of guided pathways reforms. And it also meant that these partnerships had above average outcomes for dual enrollment students. Specifically, we used statewide administrative data to identify pairs of colleges and high schools that had increased access to dual enrollment for 3 student groups, which include Black, Hispanic, and low-income students, and had also increased early college success for these student groups. So that refers to things like college matriculation and persistence within the first year of college. And then in terms of high schools, we focused on selecting traditional public high schools since we were really interested in understanding the extent to which we might observe DEEP practices taking place in regular high schools without selective admissions processes. The interviews that we did focused on understanding the types of practices that these partnerships were using that aligned with the 4 areas of the DEEP framework. And then we also used the interviews to understand how colleges and their K-12 partners were implementing dual enrollment practices across sectors. So what did we learn? For each of the DEEP practice areas, I'm going to share some overall findings and then practices that we observed that aligned with the DEEP framework. So overall, we found that while colleges and their high schools partners were generally collaborating on their outreach efforts, we saw that high schools were playing a bit more of an active role in outreach compared to their college partners. And we also observed that participants focused on general outreach strategies when they were describing what they were doing for outreach. And there was not very much discussion about how outreach efforts were designed to encourage and support underrepresented student groups, in particular to participate in dual enrollment. And there were a few practices that we observed that align with the DEEP framework. And these included using disaggregated data to understand where there were gaps in dual enrollment participation and then tailoring outreach to these groups. Secondly, starting outreach about dual enrollment as early as elementary school. And then in Florida, where state statute permits this, we saw that most of the sites were using alternative methods like high school GPA instead of placement testing to determine students' eligibility for dual enrollment. In the area of aligning dual enrollment courses to college programs, overall, we found that most colleges were making efforts to align dual enrollment to further education, including to programs at their community college, as well as local 4-year transfer destinations. And then in terms of deep aligned practices, we saw that sites were creating program maps that showed how dual enrollment courses aligned to or would help a student fulfill a specific college degree. And then we also visited several high schools that were organized by career academies or career-connected programs. And in these high schools, we observed that they were embedding dual enrollment courses into the programs that were offered in their academies. And so this was a way to kind of just make dual enrollment courses a more default part of the high school curriculum. In the area of early career and academic exploration, advising, and planning, overall, we found that efforts to help students with exploring college options and careers was really taking place at the K-12 level, and that at the colleges, outside of advising appointments, there weren't really major efforts to help students with exploration. We also found that all colleges were providing advising to dual enrollment students, but the nature and the frequency of this advising varied on a lot of different factors. Some of this included state-specific advising policies, and also, of course, the college-specific advising policies. And then lastly, we found that 3 colleges had challenges providing advising to dual enrollment students, and this was really due to limited advising capacity, which we know from other research is a very common challenge for community colleges in general. And then in terms of deep life practices, we found that high schools were showcasing dual enrollment courses and career academies to help students learn about post-secondary opportunities. We also observed training of college advisors and high school counselors on approaches related specifically to advising of dual enrollment students. And then we also saw that some sites were requiring advising appointments at specific credit benchmarks, otherwise referred to as checkpoint advising. And during those appointments, students were receiving support to build out educational plans. And then in the last area of deep practice, which is high quality instruction and academic support, overall, we really observed only a few examples of efforts to support high quality instruction and dual enrollment. And there were just a variety of challenges related to this practice area, and more so than we saw in any other area. For instance, there were participants who talked about the need to really improve the efforts to monitor the instructional quality of dual enrollment courses. But there were some practices we observed that align with the DEEP framework. And these included providing tailored professional development for instructors of dual enrollment courses, monitoring students' progress in their dual enrollment courses, and providing academic support to students when they need it. And usually this was very highly coordinated between the community colleges and the high schools. And then finally, we also observed a lot of online courses, in particular asynchronous courses. And for these, we saw that the sites were providing students with structure to take these courses with a dedicated class period, and then also having a proctor or a facilitator present in order to provide help to students when they needed it. So to conclude, I'll summarize what we see as some of the implications of this research for dual enrollment practice. So because the partnerships we studied closed equity gaps and increased early college success using practices that aligned with this framework, we think that the framework can be helpful for practitioners who want to advance equitable access to dual enrollment. And then it also provides helpful direction as well as some examples of strategies that practitioners might find useful for starting this work or expanding this work. And then since the framework provides a flexible approach, we think that it encourages practitioners to invent and to refine program practices that are best suited for their individual partnerships and the underrepresented students they serve. And then finally, we observed practices that align with the DEEP framework in all 4 areas, but we didn't see at any one site that practices had been scaled or, were being provided to all or most of their dual enrollment students. So, which really suggested to us that even among high-performing dual enrollment partnerships, doing this type of work on a large scale really involves considerable amount of resources and time and investment. And so with that said, there are still incentives to do so. And although I don't have time to go into this now, I'm happy to share more about what we see as the incentives on the college and the K-12 side to really invest in this work. We also think that since community colleges are the institutions that confer dual enrollment credit, that the colleges really need to lead the implementation of DEEP practices. And we think that community college practitioners can start this work by first engaging their K-12 partners in discussions about their respective goals for dual enrollment, and then use this as a means to identify a shared vision for dual enrollment that will specifically uplift underserved students, schools, and communities. And then following these conversations, our research suggests that partners should talk openly about their incentives and costs with respect to expanding access to dual enrollment, how they can strengthen their dual enrollment processes, and how their current dual enrollment students are being supported to use dual enrollment course taking purposefully to help them build post-secondary momentum. So thank you so much for listening. Please feel free to get in touch with me. And I could also connect you with some of my colleagues at the Community College Research Center that I'm doing this work with. And I'm also happy to share these slides. So thank you.
That was one of the questions in the chat, was whether these slides would be available for you all. So I think, Sarah, if you don't mind, if you send those to Emily Smale, and then she can post them on the website, and it'll be posted associated with this session. I do want to remind folks that every session is also being recorded, and that information will be available on the website for, I think it's 30 days, and then we'll move it to a YouTube channel, so that will be available in perpetuity. So we had a few questions in the chat for the presenters, and so I'm going to start with Brandy's question first, and this was also in the Q&A. How or what techniques are you using to get buy-in with the pathway or program of study, not only at the university level, but at the K-12 level? Thank you. And so, and this might be something, Sarah, I don't know whether you've seen in your research or Holly, either one, about how people successfully are able to get buy-in to implement these dual enrollment pathways.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Go for it, Sarah.
Okay, thank you. I would say, and this is also a part of our research that I didn't share today, but I think really because the DEEP framework is proposing a type of approach to dual enrollment that's different than the status quo approach, we find that it really involves just really a mindset shift in terms of how you're thinking about the implementation of dual enrollment. And I'm happy to share more about what these different shifts would entail. But I think that is really kind of the first step, is establishing a shared DEEP mindset amongst partners. And so, for example, among the 6 sites that we observed, so those 6 community colleges, and then all 12 of those high school partners, we identified what we saw as the mindset themes. And so, like, one of them, for example, was just a shared commitment to prioritize underserved communities and schools, and position dual enrollment as a pathway for upward mobility and workforce development. We also saw there's a shared mindset around committing to doing what is best for students, even if it's not expedient at times. Believing in supporting the potential of all dual enrollment students. And there were other mindset shifts. So I would really say that it has to really to start with your beliefs about, you know, the types of students that can succeed in dual enrollment, and kind of expanding that beyond, you know, what we traditionally think of students who are college bound, because those are really the students that, you know, are kind of dominating the participation in dual enrollment programs across the country.
Yeah, there I couldn't agree more. I think that a kind of a holistic mindset shift is definitely part of it. I can speak from the college's perspective. We spend a lot of time working with college leaders, and we'll go to college campuses and kind of talk through the things that they're kind of working on. And sometimes it's related to dual enrollment, and sometimes it's other initiatives. And what we have learned over the years is that yes, a mindset shift is really important, and having forethought to put this dual enrollment conversation that we're talking about now under a larger umbrella that can be tied to priorities of the institution. So again, I'm talking from the college perspective. I've also seen it at universities. When we talk to faculty, administrators, things on campus, sometimes what we hear is, yes, we'd love to do better at dual enrollment. Yes, we would love to do better at X, Y, Z. But there's a little bit of initiative fatigue, right? That there are new promising practices that feel disjointed sometimes. So what we have been learning from the colleges that we work with is ways to weave complementary efforts together. So one way to have that mindset shift that Sarah was talking about would be to talk about changes in dual enrollment and how things are marketed, and those partnerships between colleges and K-12 institutions as part of a broader initiative for enrollment. So it would be a section, it would be documented, it would be tied to leaders' performance evaluations sometimes, things like that, to get really specific and strategic and prioritizing what can go together, what belongs under the same umbrella, and kind of move forward together.
Thanks to both of you. There are also a couple people adding in the chat. So Lauren talks about highly targeted recruitment and outreach programming and special partners at the district, partnerships at the district level, talking about a focus on relationship building and networking. And I think we would all agree that those relationships are the most critical thing to any partnership. Abner Oaks had a point here about suggesting that the school board can be critically important in developing that mindset vision for dual enrollment in the district. And his point is that not enough is said about school board's importance to the big picture. And I would agree with that point completely. I think school boards are an often forgotten group in terms of our research, particularly in dual enrollment. There's another question here in the chat from Brandon Lewis, and what this question asks is, many of our college instructors are finding students have gaps in prerequisite math skills and are not being successful in Gateway or Keystone math courses, which may be related to those points you were making about math vacancies too. How are NCDPI, the community college system, and the UNC system evaluating math performance and align goals for helping bridge that math? Yeah.
I love this question. This is a perpetually difficult nut to crack, right? And it's not just in dual enrollment. If you think about skill consistency across courses, that could be K-12 dual enrollment to college, K-12 to a university, college to university as sort of a vertical transfer. It could be university to university when students move and shift from one place to another. So again, I would look at it not just the skills that might be lacking dual enrollment to colleges, but also kind of think about consistency more broadly. In North Carolina, one of the things that is moving in the direction is related to data. So there's been an initiative with the UNC System Office to have numbering consistency between courses, and that's UNC to UNC. That effort has also happened in all 58 of the community colleges as well. So there is at least consistency in numbers. Which seems like a low bar, but that is the first step to make sure that there is one-to-one consistency, at least in how things are being recorded. From there, I do know that there are leadership and system level conversations that are bringing faculty into the same room together. I think that we often talk about policies and data and graphs, and sometimes it has to do with trust and having faculty to faculty from different institutions to be able to talk through what their department is covering, talk through things, and to come to an agreement about what calculus 1 at one institution means at another institution. It is a long and slow process, and higher education wasn't really designed for that. So we've got a lot of history that's working against us, but it is happening. It's starting to happen. There's also a longitudinal data project that's happening to connect post-secondary and K-12 data across the industries. And I think that that's also a critical part to start those conversations between these different sectors.
Sorry. I think we have time for one more question. So, and this is in the Q&A. In addition to eliminating minimum test score barriers, are there do you all have any thoughts on also eliminating minimum GPA requirements, because a student may have struggled during 9th and or 10th grade and would miss out on the opportunity due to a low GPA? Do either of you have thoughts about sort of this GPA requirement?
I can't speak for Sarah. I would need to look at more research about that. To look at not only the outcomes of eliminating GPA or things like that that could be barriers to entry. I would want to look at it longitudinally and see what the numbers are showing in terms of overall student success.
Yeah, I don't really have anything specific to share other than that, just generally speaking, as we observed with the deep research that we did in Florida and Texas, we did see sites in Florida that were using either high school grades or high school GPA instead of placement testing. I'd have to kind of look into the specifics of that to see if we have that in our data collection in terms of what the specific measures were that they use. But overall, those the leaders that we spoke with there were, very positive about the use of alternative measures, and they didn't observe any measurable declines in student success since making that adoption. But I agree with Holly that I think from the research perspective, there may be more research that's needed to understand that, and also maybe thinking about the combination of courses that students have taken that represent the GPA. I think that might also be important.
Right. And Suzanne had a point there in terms of there's an opportunity, I think, in Connecticut to have a certain level of professional judgment to override GPA, especially when you've got this upward trend. Like a student may have really struggled in 9th grade and then is managing to get themselves together. And then Lauren's point, and yes, I was going to make this point, Lauren, but you made it much more articulately for me, is really about this balance between access, right, and success, because we're certainly not doing students any favors if they take dual enrollment classes and fail them and don't do well on them. On the other hand, we certainly don't want to put unnecessary barriers in place to keep students who could be successful from participating in dual courses. So absolutely pros and cons there. So we're at time here. Thank you very much to both of our presenters. And again, these recordings will be made available on the conference website and then eventually on a YouTube channel. And we'll send you information with that link when it becomes available. Thanks to everyone.